So you and I have been talking offline a lot about generative AI, and one of the things you said to me was some companies are failing because they're just not ready. What exactly does not ready mean? How would you explain that to the 10x audience?
Yeah, Stuart, it's a good question, and we don't want to sit here and pretend like we have all the answers of what readiness can mean in every single situation. Of course, readiness depends a lot on what you're trying to use or what an organization is trying to use generative AI for. But if we put it into a few categories, fundamentally, what we see readiness meaning is first, there's a very clear alignment of enterprise or business unit strategy with not just generative AI strategy, but that generative AI strategy is embedded within a broader digital transformation strategy. And so I think the simple way to think about this is it isn't just about having the most advanced generative AI use case. It's about having the most advanced generative AI use case that aligns with your strategy, but also takes into account that there might be a more simple digital or technology solution to achieve that objective. I think the second point, it's very important to have an awareness internally at the organization of the degree to which disruption risk for your company exists from generative AI, but also as a broader industry and for your people. And so that's second in terms of disruption risk. And third, that there's clarity around the basic operating model tenets that are needed to stand up value creating generative AI. And so those three areas, when thought about in totality, if you have an idea of what those are and how they're being implemented, that's what readiness looks like to us.
What it sounds like to me is it's not just the technological, you have the right technology, or you have the right systems and processes. Sounds like to me a lot of it has to do with the culture and the people.
The temptation is when we're looking at generative AI is to talk about technology. What our view is that there is obviously a technology component, but there's a very clear traditional view on operating model, and a very big part of that. And specifically when we talk about that third point that we mentioned about clarity around operating model tenants to stand up value creating generative AI, people and ways of working is incredibly critical to the way that comes together. If you don't set up your people and have the right people in place that have the right mindset to unlock value, the generative AI value promise starts to go away. So as an organization, what we've been talking to our clients about is being much more deliberate to, yes, develop the technology, but make sure that you're going in and focusing on what it takes from a people perspective to enable the technology. And we think the most effective way to do that is to have clear operating model principles in place that unlock the potential of your people and put the right people in the right roles to achieve the right outcomes.
hmm And so we have your technology, you have your processes, you have your culture, you have empowerment of people who are operating. If I were a company and I wanted to say, do we have those in place? How would I go and determine whether or not everything's in place that could lead to a successful implementation of generative AI?
I think what we would say is just a baseline understanding of where you're sitting today, not as much from a technology assessment, but rather an assessment of what are your internal mindsets, what are the ways of working as we talked about, the processes that are in place, and what might be referred to as softer details that in our view are the main drivers of value creation in generative AI. To put a finer point on it, we think it comes down to three fundamental questions. The first one is, how effectively has your organization extracted value from implementation of innovative technologies in the past? And so what we think is in the generative AI context, if there have been challenges in the past through your organization generating value from new technologies, those challenges are going to translate and continue with generative AI. The second question would be, how effectively has your organization undergone change management programs in the past? So, in our view, generative AI represents a huge opportunity, but it represents a very dramatic necessity of change management across the organization in a lot of different ways. So, that's a critical question to understand. And the last one, similar to the topics that we talked about before, how prepared are your people and your people at all levels, not just people doing mundane tasks, but how prepared are your people to make decisions and adapt to an environment where information can be not just collected and distilled and acted upon, but it can, all of those things are true in the fraction of the time. And so essentially, how ready are your people to exist and thrive in the generative AI landscape?
Hmm. You've started the process of developing a tool for evaluating readiness. Can you talk a little bit about that tool?
Yeah, so we boiled it down to a few questions, but like most things, the devil is always in the details. And as we said, the first step to addressing any uncertainty starts with understanding that true baseline. And the tool that we're talking about takes an honest look internally. It dives into generative AI topics, both in terms of people, processes, and technologies. But then it starts to unpack some of those more fundamental areas, like we talked about with openness and the ability for your people to take on ownership and feel confident that they're going to have the type of environment that they need to be successful and for generative AI to extract value. So, what the readiness diagnostic does is it gives you an initial snapshot as you walk through it and ask yourself some evaluative questions of where are we today in terms of, like we talked about before, not the technology that's in place, but as we start to get to the point where technology and use cases start to turn to scaling and start to turn to value, how ready are you to unlock that value for your business?